You know, ham radio is a wonderful hobby, isn't it? We spend a lot of time ferreting around for information, trying this, trying that, reading this, reading that, being told one thing, being told another. And I suppose over the years you gradually pick up a reasonable amount of knowledge. But there's always something new to learn or something new to ponder. And I think the good thing about amateur radio is we don't always approach it from a purely scientific point of view. We actually get our hands dirty. We go out into the field with some wire cutters, some lengths of wire, trying this and trying that. Sometimes we have some great success. And sometimes we think, well, it's working, but I wonder why it's working so well. Well, we're in a situation like that. I say we. I've been talking with Brian ZL3XDJ over the last year. Been working on the air on 40 metres and 20 metres in New Zealand, of course. And, well, some interesting results come out of trying this and trying that. Brian is rather like me. He goes out in the field, gets his hands dirty. Sometimes it doesn't work, but sometimes it does. Anyway, let me recap briefly and then give you the latest news on developments on this path between ZL and G-Land. Probably the ultimate path, really, for many of us. In the last video I was covering the fact that I was comparing my vertical antenna with my dipole, and I'd found that the vertical antenna wasn't so good for DX from my location as my horizontal dipole was. I did find, however, that if I raised the radials or raised the vertical above ground level, only above about 2 or 3 feet, I got a significant improvement in signal on the vertical, and it cut down noise, and I only needed 2 radials, so I didn't need loads and loads of radials on the ground. So I found there was certainly a benefit in raising that vertical above ground. However, it still didn't really come up to the horizontal antenna in most cases. And my horizontal antenna was only around about 25 feet above the ground, so you wouldn't expect it to have predominantly low angle radiation. I put forward the idea that perhaps the angle of arrival of the signals from the DX, and we're talking about long distance VK and ZL, perhaps the angle of arrival of those signals was not as low as we might imagine, and that I put forward that because that was a theory that seemed to match the results I got. But there were other theories put forward, and Bill W6QR got in touch with me, and he came forward with a theory which is equally likely to be possible and may well be part of the reason, and that is the fact that the magnetic field in the southern hemisphere is predominantly vertically polarized, whereas the magnetic field in the northern hemisphere is predominantly horizontally polarized. And he put forward the theory that a vertical antenna will couple much better into the vertically polarized magnetic field in the southern hemisphere, particularly down towards VK and ZL, than a horizontal would do. And for what?
Okay, I found this on the web for no. Check it out.
I think Siri has actually picked.
Here's what I found.
Yes, thank you very much, Siri. I think Siri's picked up what I was talking about and found some details about vertical antennas. How wonderful. Perhaps I'll read it later on. It might be informative. Anyway, so the theory was that the vertical antenna in the southern hemisphere, VK or ZL, where the ZL3XDJ operates, and I'll cover that in a bit, would couple better into the ionosphere than a horizontally polarized antenna. And the reverse could well be true in the northern hemisphere, where the magnetic field is predominantly horizontally polarized, and therefore coupling of a horizontal antenna might be better. And he covered very briefly the X and O modes of the ionosphere and the magnetic field. I have to say that it's something which I'm not familiar with, and maybe one or two viewers may have a better depth of knowledge of that than I have. However, it's an interesting proposition that maybe a vertical antenna in ZL in New Zealand will work better than a vertical antenna in Europe. Also, the fact is that a lot of the path on that, or a lot of that path, is overseas, so multi-hop will probably be hitting seawater. So that makes it quite a good path. And of course, the grey zone, when we find that signals are very good during dusk and during the sunrise. And I know that Brian operates very much on the during the grey zone, and it obviously works very well. But he does put out a very good signal. Anyway, we'll come to Brian a bit later. I do want to thank all those that have come in with all sorts of ideas as to what may be happening. Some, like me, have experienced the same. Some have got some various ideas. The problem with a lot of these suggestions is that it doesn't actually explain everything. And really and truly, we're in a situation where we're trying to fathom out why my dipole is still working better than my vertical antenna, and why other people have got noticed the same effect, certainly in Europe, and why, of course, Brian has the opposite effect. He finds that a vertical is much better than a horizontal antenna. So I do thank you for all those that have written in. Keep coming up with your ideas. It's very interesting. And I'm not sure that we will ever find, we will probably never absolutely be, let's say that again, we will probably never be absolutely sure of the reason for this, and it may be that it is several reasons. It may be more complex than we think or know, or whatever. I've been exchanging emails with Bill W6QR, and he's sent me some interesting diagrams, which is, let me put up on the screen now. The first one is of a elevated vertical with two radials, and you'll see quite interestingly that if you raise a vertical significantly above the ground, then you get a bit of high angle as well as low angle radiation. Now I can only imagine that the high angle is coming from radiation from the radials themselves, which would make sense. So it's quite a nice all-round aerial, but of course not everybody can put a vertical up at that height. So let me show you now a diagram of a vertical with elevated radials just 2 feet above the ground, and it was very low. And you'll see this is more traditional radiation pattern you'd expect from a vertical. It's predominantly low angle radiation, but that is with just 2 radials. Compare that with vertical on the ground where you may have 30 or 40 radials. So it does show that just 2 radials works very well. If you add an extra 2 radials, you have 4 radials, and I presume this is done with radials for compass points, then you get a slightly improved radiation pattern at low angles, but not too much difference, and probably debatable whether it's actually worth adding an extra 2 radials. Probably in a lot of locations, 2 radials 180 degrees opposite each other is probably quite practical. Now there's also an interesting effect which you can get. If you use a single radial, you do get a bit of directivity in the direction of that single radial. And again, I'm talking at low heights, around about 2 or 3 feet above the ground. If you add a second radial at 90 degrees, in other words, you've got a 90 degree angle between the 2 radials in the azimuth view, then you tend to get a slightly improved directivity. You get a bit of front to back, which may benefit you if you particularly want to work certain areas of the world. So it's interesting. It's interesting stuff. The radials just above the ground give you a significant improvement, and you only need 2 radials. So there we are. It's more food for thought. It's more chance to experiment. Here's a clip from a video that Brian, ZL3XDJ, published a little while ago. And I think his enthusiasm will probably encourage you to try raised radials. Yeah, take a look at this.
We had some vertical antennas, and I was also experimenting with a 3-element parasitic vertical antenna firing long path, and it worked very well. I actually got an email from a few people who were quite excitedly telling me about elevated verticals. So basically, we put a 20-meter elevated vertical with 4 radials, and as you'll see in the results, it works so well. Completely surprised myself. Really did work so well.
And in fact, Brian had such good results with his 20-meter elevated vertical that he decided to build one for 17 metres as well. And had...
Good morning, Brian, ZL3XDJ Channel. Good morning. Nice to hear you on 17. I'll give you a report the next over, Brian.
First time I've caught you on 17. It's the first time I've had an antenna on 17. I'm just using an elevated vertical with 2 radials there, Paul. Go ahead.
Well, it's working well. You're 5, 7, 5 and 8. 5 and 7 to 5 and 8, right.
Now, if you haven't tuned into Brian's channel yet, I would encourage you to just type in ZL3XDJ. It's fascinating, actually. He is really hands-on. He is a good signal into the UK. Most mornings, when conditions are right, he can put a really strong signal into the UK simply by using a basic vertical antenna in his garden. Now, he's always been a good signal into the UK with his ground-based verticals, but since he's raised them off the ground, he's a fantastic signal. And well, thanks, Brian, for all your work on this in this area. We do exchange emails quite regularly now, actually, with Brian. But he's a great guy, and thanks, Brian, for all the work you've done in encouraging people to try elevated verticals. Long may it continue. And as I say before, subscribe to his channel. It's an interesting channel. It's interesting to follow somebody on the other side of the world whose basic ham radio skills are what he's learnt by cut and try, and you can't beat that in ham radio. So let's just finish off this particular chapter on the mysteries of HF propagation. I should apologise, by the way, I have got a cold at the moment, and I think the audio will sound a bit nasally, so apologies there. But winter's coming and we expect colds, don't we? I had a contact with Brian this morning, ZL3XDJ. He was coming through on 20 metres, very good signal actually, probably the strongest signal I've heard actually. He was about 5 and 8, 5, 8, 9 on CW, and we had a QSO, and I took the opportunity of switching antennas from my dipole to my vertical just to make sure that it was not just reception that I was having a problem with in the drop-in signal. So I switched over to my vertical. Brian, by the way, had given me 579 on 20 metres, and I switched to the vertical and he gave me a report of 449. So there was quite a dramatic difference when I switched over to my vertical. Switched back to the dipole and went back to normal again. Interesting stuff. We also QSY'd very briefly to 17 metres, Brian has got a 17 metre vertical up now, which is working very well. And unfortunately, my half-size 5RV doesn't work at all well on 17 metres, and I got very high SWR. But I persisted, and he actually gave me 449 on 17 metres. He wasn't much stronger than that, but I think had I had a better antenna, then I would have been able to copy him somewhat better. So it was just an interesting test. Here's a clip of my signal into Brian in ZL3XDJ on 20 metres CW. You can hear it's quite a good signal strength. Bear in mind I'm using a half-size G5RV at 25 feet. And then we switched to 17 metres. Now my half-size G5RV has got a terrible VSWR, but I managed to load it up, and here's my rather weak signal on 17 metres, but we got through. Not sure whether conditions were very good, but anyway, at least we made contact. But as I say, the VSWR on my 5RV was very high, so it does prove that even with a high VSWR you can make contacts. Anyway, have a listen. The 5RV, by the way, half-size 5RV, hasn't got a particularly low VSWR on 20 metres. It's about 3 to 1 on 20 metres, so it's not a good match. But as I've mentioned before on this channel, provided that you can match in to an antenna with a modest VSWR, then it will work. Provided you can get power into it, it'll work. The 3 to 1 VSWR is not going to make much difference in terms of signal strength. It's less than a dB. So we're back to really still pondering why Brian's vertical works so much better than a dipole for him, and I've got the completely opposite experience here. My horizontal antenna, which I probably said several times, is only up 25 feet above ground, so it's not high at all. Half-size 5RV, 25 foot above the ground. It's straight, it's not bent at all, it's straight. And my vertical is always inferior to the dipole. And my next test will be to build a monoband 20 metre vertical off the ground, just to see whether or not that makes any difference. At the moment I've got the vertical on the ground but the radial's above ground. I covered that in the previous video. It's a bit of a mystery really. What are the theories? Well, the theory is that the angle of the signal arriving at my QTH is not as low as one would expect, therefore the dipole favours higher angle radiation, and the reason the signal is not coming in at a particularly low angle is because the propagation is multi-hop. I should add that when I work Brian and other stations in New Zealand, it's generally speaking the twilight zone, with the grey line zone. And interesting enough, by the way, it lasts for about an hour. Brian's signal, when I worked him this morning, I think we'd just gone past the peak, and after about 10 or 15 minutes you could hear the signal going down somewhat. So is it the angle of arrival of the signal, or is it something like Bill W6QR suggested, that because of the magnetic field in the southern hemisphere being vertically polarised and the field in the northern hemisphere being horizontally polarised, does the vertical effectively work better in the southern hemisphere and a horizontal antenna work better in the northern hemisphere? I'm sure many of you out there have got verticals, particularly in the northern hemisphere in Europe where I'm located, and you may have similar results to me, or you may have different results. It's a bit of a conundrum, isn't it? Whether we should actually get the answer, I'm not quite sure. But perhaps if we press on with experiments and tests, we may come up, or perhaps not get the final solution, but come closer to the solution. Now, I don't want to put you off vertical antennas, they're very good antennas, but what I would say is that try and get your vertical above ground level. If you get your vertical even 3 or 4 foot above ground level, you'll get something like 3 dB improvement in performance, both receive and transmit, and you'll also get a lower noise level. So it's not too difficult. Most verticals can easily be raised above the ground by a few feet. Also, you don't need so many radials. 2 radials will be quite enough to give you really good performance. 4 radials, slightly better, but 2 radials and you'll be away. In the meantime, thanks for your support on this video channel. Don't forget to press the subscribe button. It just means to say that when there's another video coming up, you're notified. And it's nice to know that when we look at the subscribers numbers, then we know we're sort of working in the right direction. And don't forget, of course, that this channel is basically run by Waters and Stanton, and we've been in the ham radio business now for 52 years, would you believe? We've got a wide range of products in stock. We've got an excellent website. We've got a blog, etc., etc. So go on our website, have a mooch around. As usual, you enjoy ham radio. You take care, and as usual again, I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye for now.